Hey there, welcome back to the channel. Today, we have another little bit of a job to do, and that job is, we have a tier list of the mainline Final Fantasy games that we're taking a look at. Now, I have played, I would say a majority of these, and played and beaten, I mean when I say that. I'm a pretty big fan of the Final Fantasy franchise. I've been playing it for pretty much as long as I've been playing video games. I mean, when I was a little kid, we had a PS1 demo disc that had Final Fantasy VIII on it. And that was like my first real exposure to an RPG. And then when we got a PS2, when I was real young, we got Final Fantasy X with it. And that was my first JRPG that I really owned, and I've been in love with the franchise ever since. I mean, it's had its ups and downs since then, I mean, we all know that, but I've stuck with it, and let's see what I rank each one of these games. If you really agree with any of the opinions that I have here, I'm gonna need you to hit that like button. If there's any opinions that you really dislike, any that you totally disagree with, click dislike. That's just how it works here when I do tier lists. If you don't like my opinions, click dislike. Haven't got a dislike yet, so I haven't upset too many people, clearly. But let's see how we go, eh? Okay, we're gonna be starting with Final Fantasy I here. Very basic game. It's really, that and Dragon Quest I are really what started the JRPG genre as we know them today. Super basic game. It introduced the starting classes that make up the bread and butter of the franchise now, but there's really nothing too special going on here. I mean, the story's pretty lackluster, the villain's a bit of a nothing, your characters are all just OC nothings. There's not a whole lot of substance going on in Final Fantasy I. It did pave the way for the others. Now, when I say that I've played Final Fantasy I, I've played the PSP remake, not the original, which is sort of like a prettied up, bit more polished version of Final Fantasy I. But that being said, I'm still going to be giving Final Fantasy I a C ranking. I don't think it's a bad game at all. I mean, the combat's still good. The version that I played, the PSP version, I mean, it looks pretty decent. It's just pretty basic, real bread and butter stuff. Now, moving on to Final Fantasy II. Okay, now this one here, Final Fantasy II, okay. When people say that they don't like a Final Fantasy game, usually they're referring to like Final Fantasy VIII or 13 or something as like the game that they really hate. For me, that's not the case. My least favourite Final Fantasy is Final Fantasy II. I hate this game. I hate it so much. The story is terrible. I mean, it's bare bones, and it's not really anything to like. It's not like it's completely awful. It's got an interesting premise, but the characters are nothing. The areas are lame. I hate the leveling system most of all. That's what I really hate about this game. You don't level up in the traditional way in Final Fantasy II if you haven't played it. The more you use actions, the more they level up. Think of like an Elder Scrolls type system, like something you'd see in Skyrim or Oblivion, but then applied to a turn-based JRPG. And I don't know if you can make that system work today, but back when this game was made, it does not work. It does not work. The balance between the enemies and you and everything is just so off. I don't enjoy playing this game at all. The furthest I've gotten through it is, I think, maybe 5 hours in, and I've never been able to stomach any more of that. This is an easy F tier game. I think this is the worst game of the franchise. Look, there are merits to Final Fantasy VIII and Final Fantasy XIII. I think that both of them have things that make them good games. I think that Final Fantasy II has no positive qualities. None. No positive qualities. Now, moving on to Final Fantasy III. You know what? I don't mind this one. I played it on the DS remake, which was pretty damn difficult because, I mean, that's the first time it came west, right? And I didn't mind it. I always kind of liked how it was a bit more of like a open worldy sort of Final Fantasy game in comparison to a lot of the others. You know, you pick your classes, you've got a decent amount of class variety to pick from. The story is more or less not there for the most part, which is kind of sucks, but you know, I don't mind it. I did manage to beat it a couple years ago, and it's been a while since I played it now. Now, keep in mind, when I say I've beaten all these Final Fantasy games, I think the most recent one that I actually finished was probably Final Fantasy IX, and that was like 4 years ago. I haven't replayed or played a Final Fantasy game since, I don't think. So I played all of these a long time ago, so this is definitely going off of memory rather than recent experiences. But I mean, I remember them for the most part. Now, Final Fantasy III, it's good, it's decent. I'm going to be putting it in a B tier. I think it's better than Final Fantasy I. It's got a lot better class variety, and it's more interesting to play, I guess. But it still doesn't really have anything that is that compelling. If you're gonna play a Final Fantasy game, you're not really gonna play Final Fantasy III, are ya? Okay, now moving on to Final Fantasy IV. Now is going to be one of the more controversial opinions, I think. I love Final Fantasy IV. The first time I played it was actually on the DS, and man, that DS version is ball-bustingly hard. I heard that they actually did some difficulty balances when they then ported that version over to iOS and then Steam and consoles, where they the difficulty that was in the DS version is now hard mode, and they added in an easier mode for it. On the DS, this game is rough. It's super difficult. Like, there are bosses that have like super moves. Like, halfway through the fight, they can just one-shot your entire party if you don't grind the shit out of the areas beforehand. It is nutty. It's super, super difficult. And then the PSP version came out, and that had like the difficulty set from like the SNES and GBA versions, and I loved that version. I don't really like the visuals of it anymore. I think the art style is a little wonky, but I really do actually love Final Fantasy IV a lot. It is one of my favorites. A lot of people are a bit on it because it's got a fairly basic sort of fantasy story, and the characters sort of have their one niche that they fill. But I actually like the fact, compared to all the games that we've had so far in the list where you make your characters and you pick their classes, I actually like that, you know, you got Yang the monk, you got, you know, Kane the dragoon, Cecil who goes from Dark Knight to Paladin, which Cecil is one of my favourite characters, main characters in the franchise. I actually really like that each character has their set roles, but you get enough party members that you still get to customize your team and have exactly the classes that you want. I think it's a really, really good balance. And I like the story a lot. The story of Golbez, spoilers for like a fucking 30-year-old game. Golbez is your older brother that you don't know exists. Yeah, I actually really like this game a lot. I'm going to be giving Final Fantasy IV an A tier ranking. I think it's great. I really think Final Fantasy IV is one of the best in the franchise. One of my personal favourites anyway. The only reason it's not S tier is because, yeah, look, it is a little bit basic in terms of gameplay compared to some of the other games. Now, Final Fantasy IV The After Years. This was like a little add-on that I think it first got released on like WiiWare, and then made it over to the PSP version, which then made it over to the Steam release, I think, and some of the console versions. Never played it, never touched it, don't really have much desire to. I really love Final Fantasy IV and all the characters in it, and I'm pretty good to leave the story off where it is, to be honest. I've heard not great things, but I'm going to stick it in the haven't played section, because I'm not going to rate a game that I haven't played. Now, Final Fantasy V. This is a good game, but I don't think it's an amazing game. I remember a couple years back there was like a subset of the fan base that were die-hard Final Fantasy V fans. I'm not one of them. The gameplay is good, and the class customization is really quite good, but the characters are super basic. There's not a whole lot going on with the story. Exdeath is an okay villain. He's got a cool design, but I don't think he really does that much. It's just, when I think back, and I think back on like the story events and that, I think of the battle on, I think it's Battle on the Big Bridge or something, where you fight Gilgamesh. That had a cool theme and was a cool section of the game, but other than that, I really don't remember much about this at all. Super, super basic story. I will be putting Final Fantasy V, I'll be putting it in B tier, above Final Fantasy III. We might end up reviewing this decision later because it could either go here or it could go here below Final Fantasy IV. I'm going to stick it here and then look at my opinions further on down the list. We might end up... It's somewhere here. I'm just going to stick it here for now and see what other games sort of line up in these other tiers. Now, we have FF6. This is a classic. This has such a good story. such good characters. I need to replay this game. I really want to replay it. I was going to when it got released on consoles and Steam, but that new art style that they did for this and 5 is so goddamn ugly that I will never play those versions, so I will just stick with playing either the SNES or the GBA version. But Final Fantasy VI is a great game. Like, the characters are really good, combat and character customization is awesome, the story is one of the best in the franchise, I think. This is an easy S tier. I'm not going to play around at all. It's an easy S tier. It's up there with some of the best JRPGs. Now we get to Final Fantasy VII. This is also a really damn great game. The main cast are all good. I don't think there's any losers in the cast at all. I actually even really like Kate Sith. Even that's usually the one that everyone goes to is who they hate, but I actually quite like him still. The story is good. I mean, the story is mostly front-loaded. That's why the remake takes place pretty much exclusively in Midgar, because the story really is front-loaded. That first section is the best part of the game by far, but I still think the game as a whole is good stuff. Going to all the different areas of the world, especially if you played like Crisis Core or something, or you've had a little bit more experience with that extended universe, all the places that you go to are just fun little Easter eggs after experiencing the rest of that. If I have any complaints at all about Final Fantasy VII, it's the fact that you can customize your characters and what builds you want them to be, but for the most part, every character sort of has roughly the same sort of stat distribution, which means that, yeah, you can customize your party, but no character really specializes in anything, and kind of bores me a little bit. I would like a reason, like an actual in-battle reason to use different characters. Because let's say I'm running on my first playthrough, let's say I'm running Cloud, Tifa, Barret, and I want to go a warrior, a white mage, and a black mage. I can do that no problem, right? And I get to choose who I want to be what. I can have Barret be the white mage, I can have him be the black mage, it doesn't bloody matter. But then let's say I want to do a slightly different build in a second playthrough. I want to do maybe 2 warriors and a thief. I mean, who the hell would do that? But let's just use it as an example. The thing is that there is absolutely no reason why I can't just go Cloud, Barret, Tifa again. I mean, there's no reason to really change up the characters, which is actually something that I dislike about the game. It's probably the only complaint that I have. I would like the characters to have a little bit more of a different sort of stat distribution, so you have a reason to use some characters as some roles compared to others, just so you can actually swap out things more on subsequent playthroughs. But still, I mean, if that's my only complaint, it's very clear that this is also going, not in B tier, this is going in S tier. I think I will, yeah, this is the question. Is it going above or below Final Fantasy VI? Now for me, I've played sections of Final Fantasy VII in the last couple of years, but I haven't played FF6 in like 8 years? It's been a long time. I'm gonna put 7 above it. More of this game sticks out to me than this. This only has sections that stick out to me, whereas pretty much the entire experience of this still sticks out to me, and I love the cast. I love the cast of FF7. Sephiroth is a great goddamn villain, which Kefka is a good villain in his own right. Kefka's a great villain, but Sephiroth really is the GOAT. Hey, it's me in Post here, what up? Sorry to interrupt your riveting video, but I've now realized that while doing the tier list, I pretty much talked about 0 of the soundtracks for any game, which is honestly probably the best feature of these Final Fantasy games. They're known for their soundtracks. So this is the part where I tell you that it was deliberate all along, and the reason being that I'm going to be doing a separate tier list just for the Final Fantasy soundtracks. Yay! Alright, now get back to watching the video, and don't forget to subscribe! Now we're getting to Final Fantasy VIII, and I've played a bit of this game, not a whole lot though. I definitely don't think I've played enough of it to give it a ranking. I think the furthest I ever made it in was getting up to the first section where you play as Laguna and his crew. The first time you control them, that's the furthest I've ever made it through the game. So definitely not a very long way. Now I do actually kinda, like, I don't find Squall as annoying as a lot of other people do, and the story interests me a bit. But the draw system does suck. I don't like the draw system or the GF system for summons. Yeah, I don't feel like I can accurately rank this game along with the others. I just don't have the amount of experience with it that I do with the others, so I'm going to stick it in haven't played. Now, Final Fantasy IX, the most recent of the games that I think I've beaten. And I love Final Fantasy IX a lot. I really do love it. The characters are all great. Zidane, Vivi, Steiner, the princess. The rest, though, are kind of hit and miss. I think Amaranth, is it Amaranth? Amaranth, I don't know, is one of the party members, along with Freya, Kina, and I can't even remember the name of the other one. Reiko? Eiko? I don't know. But one half of the party is absolutely great, and the other half of the party are kind of lackluster and feel like they're sort of tacked on to the journey. The story is really good. I actually really loved traveling this world and going on Zidane's journey. Kuja is a good villain. It's such a shame that he's not like the final boss or something. You know, that final boss that ends up happening is super lackluster. I remember the last few parts of this game in the areas that you're in were just like, and the story things that happen like around, I'm gonna guess it's around the end of disc 2 or something to do with where you're at a tree. Great video game. The only complaint I have about this is the final boss and the fact that loading up battles is so slow. That's really the only complaints that I have about it. I am actually going to stick Final Fantasy IX in S tier, and I'm gonna put it above 6. I really love Final Fantasy IX. I think it's an absolutely fantastic game. It's pretty underrated. You know, a lot of games in this franchise have their big fan base. Obviously 7, 6 does as well. 5 has a small little dedicated fan base. I feel like 9 is really one that deserves a bigger fan base out of the lot. Now moving on to FF10, like I said earlier in the video, this was really my first JRPG that I ever owned, and I have beaten this a good number of times. I pretty much have the entire game memorized. Now it's not a perfect game. Some of the cast members are a bit annoying. Looking at you, Titus. Kimahri is a bit of a nothing until you get to the mountain, but then after that is a nothing again. Yuna's really whiny, and Wakka's just a bit dumb. Auron's great. Auron and Lulu, I think, are the best cast members in the game. Riku's a bit of a nothing as well. I do like the story with Sin a lot, and the backstory with Braska, Auron, and Jet is great. Really good stuff. The bosses are fun. The combat system in X is really good, actually, but the game is a little too much on the easy side. The main villain, Seymour, is an annoying dick, and I'm kinda iffy on this fear grid system. I like the way that it lets you customize the characters pretty much exactly how you want, but I do think that I would prefer the game if it had a more traditional level up system, keeping the characters in their designated roles. Plus, every cloister of trials fucking blows. I'm going to be putting Final Fantasy X at the bottom of A tier. If I had to pick which one of these two games I would replay Final Fantasy IV rather than X, but I would rather play X than anything else below. Yeah, I think that's where X belongs. Now moving on to X2. I don't have a lot to say about this game. I have beaten it. I don't remember that much of it. I remember the story sucking a lot. The main character trio is a little off. This game just doesn't fit my vibe, if I could put it in a simple sentence. The combat system is really good, and like mastering the classes is fun, but other than that, I don't really vibe this game that much. So I'm going to be putting 10-2 in B tier, above 3 but below 5. I think that is the right spot for that one. I don't remember who the villain of this game is at all. Is it a machine thing? I don't remember at all. I remember fucking nothing of this game, to be honest. Okay, now moving on to Final Fantasy XI, and I am noticing that my tier list has a bit of a discrepancy. Let me fix that up in just one moment. And Final Fantasy XI is going in MMO tier. LOL! I don't play MMOs at all. I don't have a brain for them. You know the games that have like a really addictive gameplay loop that is designed to like farm equipment and like that sort of stuff? My brain does not fuck with those at all. Whatever serotonin is meant to go in people's heads when they pick up a new bit of loot or get like a rare weapon or something just doesn't happen in my brain at all. Get absolutely nothing from it, and I hate playing games with other people. I hate playing online. Like something like Call of Duty is fine, where I'm just a random on a list of players in a match, and then that match ends, and then I'm in a new match. That's fine. But games where I have to cooperate with people and like my skills have to work at the same time as their skills, I hate that shit. I don't know whether it's just social anxiety or I just don't want to be around people when I'm playing games, but I do not fuck with MMOs in the slightest. Never have. Don't think I ever will. Not my thing. Now, Final Fantasy XII. I don't think I can judge this game either. I've played maybe the first 10 hours of it a long time ago, and I remember not being super crash hot on the combat system, because this is the first, other than 11, this is the first game that doesn't have like a turn-based battle system. It's more of like an action-focused one, which is going to be a theme that prevails for majority of the rest of the series. And I remember not being huge on it, but I remember the game not being that bad either. Now, I do plan on playing this on the PS4 or PC sometime soon. So, I mean, within the next year, you'll probably get a review of that on the channel. But I don't think I've played it enough to accurately rate it, so I'm going to stick it in haven't played. And Revenant Wings on the DS, also haven't played that. I got absolutely no comment on if Revenant Wings is good or not. Moving on to Final Fantasy XIII. And I know what you're all probably thinking, well, this is an easy F. No, not really, actually. Final Fantasy XIII was one of the first games that I got on my PS3, and I didn't hate it. I didn't love it, but I didn't hate it. It's got a really good soundtrack. It's got some beautiful visuals. The characters, the entire main cast suck. Like, every one of them. A lot of people say they really like, Saz, or whatever his name is, the dude with the fro. I don't like him either. I don't like any of them at all. Anything with the characters on screen I absolutely hated. The combat is okay. That's a big point of contention as well. Everyone hates the combat. I thought it was alright, it's just not Final Fantasy. If it was in another game where there was a bigger incentive on doing things other than just selecting attack for every move, I wouldn't mind it. The Crystarium level up system, don't like that. The story, awful. All the story, like the background of the story being communicated in like text logs, hated. The villains, hated. And I found that there were a lot of problems with the balance of bosses. You'd just go through areas that were totally fine, and then you come up to the boss of a certain area, and the boss would just absolutely trounce you. And you'd have to spend like 2 to 3 hours grinding in the one area just to be able to level it up enough to beat him. This game is not that enjoyable to play, but it does have its merits. I'm going to be sticking it in D tier. It's not an F. I don't think it's an F because this actually has positive qualities. It's just not good. It's not a good game. And 13.2 again has a terrible story. The time skipping around and going to all different time periods and locations is not good. I don't like one thing about this story. I did like, back when I was like edgy 17-year-old, I did like the design of the second main character. I can't remember whose goddamn name is now, but the dude with the long brown hair looks a lot similar to what mine's like now. I thought he was alright, but the main villain's actually really well voice acted. I mean, that's one positive, I guess. The music it's okay. It's not on par with 13, but it's okay. The gameplay's a little bit better. I actually really like the monster collecting aspect to this game. That was one thing that surprised me. I actually liked that a lot. I'm going to be giving 13.2 also a D ranking, but because the monster collecting was fun and the combat was a little bit better, I'm gonna put it just above base 13. Now 13 Lightning Returns, I did not touch for one goddamn second. It's going in, haven't played. And 14. Now I'm not going to be talking about base Final Fantasy 14. I'm going to be talking about A Realm Reborn, which is what I've played and what most of people have played. And I've actually spent a surprising amount of time with this, considering I said earlier that I don't fuck with MMOs. I've probably total put close to 100 hours into A Realm Reborn. I have started it up multiple times, put maybe 30 hours in, and then dipped out. The last time I tried to play through this game, I got up to like the third dungeon where you have to team up with people, with like a team of people and go through a dungeon, and just, it's my least favourite part of the game. If I could do those dungeons solo, if there was a way to scale down the enemy's damage and then just do it alone, I would play through this game 100%. I would do everything in it. But I can't really, and that sucks, because I like the story here. I like the world. I like running around the world with the other players existing. I think that's really cool. But when I have to actually team up with them, that's when it loses me, unfortunately. It's going in MMO lol tier. And 15, have not played. Man, I remember back when this game was known as Final Fantasy Versus 13, for all you old heads out there. It was like, I was watching trailers of Versus 13, and I was late to the party. I was watching them in like 2010, 2011, being like, man, this is going to be the sickest game ever. It looks so good. Oh my god, it looks like they're making it like Kingdom Hearts. And then they rebranded it to 15, and every single bit of gameplay footage, or just footage in general that I saw of this game, looked worse and worse as time went on. That E3 presentation where they showed off footage and the guy just kept getting stomped over and over and over by that boss, that was funny. That was funny. I remember sitting there with my best friend at the time who also loved Final Fantasy, and we were both just watching it, just looking over at each other like, oh no, the game's dog shit. So I never bought it. I'm probably going to buy the Windows version soon because it's pretty cheap, but I never bought it. It's going in, haven't played. And you're probably noticing that this tier list has a rather large omittance, that being the Final Fantasy VII Remake. And I'm just going to add the little picture in post and give you my verdict now. The Final Fantasy VII Remake, I love it. I reckon it's great. I reckon it's one of the best Final Fantasy games of all time. The combat system, even though it's like more active, I think it's the best combat system since ATB. I think it's better than the 10 combat system. I think it is the most Final Fantasy a combat system has been since ATB. The fact that hitting things with, like Kingdom Hearts style hitting, that charging up, the bar that you can then use for like ATB style actions is beautiful. It's so satisfying. And when you finally get the gameplay loop of doing your own skills while switching to other characters and using their skills, or switching over after you've used your bar to then build their bar up and all that, and being able to mix and match all the different abilities, I reckon it is the most satisfying combat in the entire series. When you finally hit that part where it all just clicks, it is more satisfying to do than normal ATB. I say that 100%. Now, the only things I don't like about the Final Fantasy VII Remake are the ending, which I'm not going to go into why, but if you've played the game, you know why. I don't like the ending. And I also think the pacing has huge issues. I remember when you start climbing the wall, it feels like it's the end of the game, and the game is telling you that it's the end of the game, but it's only about 3/4 through, and you feel like, okay, I've only got an hour or two left to go. And then an hour or two passes, and you're like, okay, I've only got an hour or two more to go. And then you hit a dungeon that goes on forever and ever. The pacing in, I wouldn't say the second half of the game, I would say the last quarter of the game, the pacing is all over the place. It is fucked. They're my only two complaints about the Final Fantasy VII Remake though. I mean, other than that, I think it's an absolutely fantastic game. if I had to put it, I mean, because I have to do it in post, I'm going to put the image here. But if I had to actually put it where I think it belongs, I would probably put it before 6 and after 9. Honestly, I reckon it's great. And there we go, there's my tier list of the mainline Final Fantasy games. Again, if you agreed with any of my opinions wholeheartedly, hit like. If there's anything that offended you that you really, really hated, hit dislike. I don't give a shit. And that's going to be about it from me. Alright guys, catch ya.